Thank you, Godfrey, for inviting me once again to participate in this meeting. As I've said in the past, you've done an amazing job of building this to what it is today. And I know it's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of energy put into it, but I think it's paying off. The number of times that I've actually come here, I've seen it grow. So that's a good thing, and what you're doing is very meaningful. So thank you. Also, before I get into our panel, I want to thank Mona. I know she's just got off stage and was a little nervous, but I do agree with what she said and what Godfrey said as far as her being on USAC. This is a huge opportunity for Indian country to have a voice that it hasn't necessarily had on the board in Washington, D.C. at USAC in particular. So I think Mona is going to be a great resource. And I hope that those of you who have the opportunity to engage with her going forward, because her work at USAC is extremely important in bringing your work, your heritage, culture, and everything to these federal agencies so there's better understanding of what it means to actually serve Indian country in the telecom and broadband space. So Mona, congratulations once again. WTA was proud to support your nomination to the USAC board and definitely look forward to working with you going forward. We have this panel on tribal engagement, and we're going to start here in a second, but just wanted to throw out one more congratulatory message and note. I flew in late last night from Pennsylvania and almost didn't make the flight, but fortunately I did, and I watched the NTTA basketball game on the plane. I think some of you may know I'm a former basketball player in college and had a great time. And so the Final Four is always important to me. And a buddy of mine who's here, he said, "Hey, Derrick, I have tickets to the Final Four if you want to go." I was like, "Oh, you're killing me. You're actually killing me." So I didn't get a chance to go. But the thing that I noticed most was the recognition last night. And Godfrey, I don't know if you all talked about this earlier today, but the recognition at the beginning of the game for the 22 tribes here in Arizona, Tohono O'odham and others, just in my mind, I don't think I've ever seen that type of display and for respect for Indian country at any major national sporting event. So my hat goes off to the community because I think that was a very special and proud moment. One that not just shows what, the pride that you should have here in the United States, but that game is viewed across the world. And so to have that honor, I think is really, really special. And I just want to say congratulations and it was well done. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Derrick Owens. With WTA Advocates for Rural Broadband, we represent close to 400 small rural broadband companies across the country. Godfrey and several others in here are members of our Tribal Affairs Committee. And over time, Godfrey and I have had these conversations a lot just about tribal engagement and why it's so important and necessary. Every program out there right now that has any federal dollars attached to it for broadband has some requirement for engaging with tribes to provide broadband, whether it's a tribal company providing broadband service or a non-tribal company wanting to engage with the community. And so we put this panel together again to have a conversation, to continue that discussion and the dialogue of how best to do this and why it's so necessary and important. We had one of our panelists, unfortunately, I think some of you may know Ginger Sunbird Martin with the Gila River tribe. She unfortunately had a scheduling conflict, so she's not going to be on the panel. So Godfrey, I think a good thing is we're going to get you back on schedule and maybe a little early. So she's not going to be on the panel, but she was her reason for serving on this panel was going to be to provide some historical, cultural context on why engagement is important and how to do it. And on both sides, from the tribal perspective, but also relating reasons why engagement on the non-tribal side is important and how not to be offensive. Unfortunately, like I said, she had a scheduling conflict, and so she wasn't able to participate today. But we do have Joe Buttweiler from CTC in Minnesota, and Randy Long from the Boys Fort Band of Chippewas, correct?
Yes.
In Minnesota as well, to serve as panelists today. And so I'm going to turn it over to them to give some opening remarks, and then we'll get into a couple of questions, and then really would like for you all to think about some questions as these guys are giving their introductory remarks that you may want to ask them on engagement and how it's working for them, and some of the pitfalls or things you should be mindful of going forward. So I'll start with Joe and then turn it over to Randy.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you for welcoming me here and having me here. I'm very appreciative of it. If you're looking at the paper agenda, you might notice that it says Christy Westbrook is supposed to be speaking, and I am not Christy Westbrook. She is the CEO at CTC, but she was unfortunately not able to be here. We're a co-op, and we've had a long-time board member who has served many rural communities in Minnesota very well, who sadly passed away a bit unexpectedly recently. And so services are for one of our board members today, and so she needed to be there. One of the things that I like most about working for a cooperative is the values that we have. And our first value is member experience. And member experience is at the heart of everything we do. And I think that drives why we've been able to partner with a number of tribal entities and utilities and local governments. It's because for us, it's about connecting rural people and delivering services that they need. But for me personally, it hasn't always been easy. And my first venture into working with the tribal community was a bit embarrassing for me. And I hope it's okay that I share this story. I had the opportunity in my late 20s to move to rural northern Minnesota. And if you picture northern Minnesota, there's the most northeastern part is a triangular tip, and trees outnumber people millions to one. And on the north, it's boundaried by Canada, and on the south, Lake Superior. And I worked for the local electric cooperative, and it was a great job. I loved it. And I worked in utilities, bringing electricity to people. But then shortly, I realized that we didn't have good internet connectivity. And the reason I really knew about this was not because of basketball, and I'm a basketball fan, but it was because I didn't have children at the time, and I love coaching youth hockey. And when you coach youth sports, you need to be certified for background checks and certified as coach and safe sport and many things. But I couldn't do my renewals online. And it drove me crazy. So in order to do my coaching recertifications, I had to drive a few hours and spend a weekend in a hotel and feed myself and buy gas and do all these things that cost me a lot of money as a person in my 20s instead of spending a few hours online. And so that bugged me. And then I started thinking about, well, we don't have good connectivity at our little office. And then soon I met other people in our community who, unbeknownst to me, were struggling with other things. And long story short, we applied for a grant in 2010 through the Rural Utility Service, and we were awarded a grant, and we began building fiber to the home in rural northeastern Minnesota. And at the same time we received that grant, our CEO left the organization, and it was almost on the same day. We got the grant and the CEO left the organization, and the board of directors came to me and said, Joe, good luck, you're in charge of the broadband grant, go. And at that point in time, all I wanted to do was be able to recertify my youth hockey coaching. And so we had this grant. The first thing I set out to do is I said, okay, everyone wants to know, we let the cat out of the bag too early. So we told everyone about this grant, and immediately everyone thought they're gonna have internet in 5 days or 30 days. And we all heard about how important permitting is, and we spent a year doing our permitting. But during that time, I thought, okay, I'm gonna go around to every community. And there's not that many communities, but I'm gonna go to every community and just tell them about the project and get feedback from them, and why is this important? What are we not thinking about that the community needs? And I did that, and we had some great meetings. And then this is the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened. I went to the most northeastern part of our service area, which is that very triangular tip, which is the Grand Portage, Chippewa. And I didn't have a relationship with them whatsoever. I knew nobody. And I walked into the meeting like I did other communities, and I had this assumption in my head that was, look at what we are doing for you. We are bringing you internet, and you're gonna love it. And it was awful. It was just terrible, because they had no idea who I was. And so that was my first learning experience, and where I learned to have patience and develop relationships. And I think that's what is so important here, because everyone in this room has the same mission, and that's connecting our communities. And I just don't think that we can do that together unless we know who each other are and the people that we're working with. And I think you've heard that from a couple of people today. Godfrey mentioned it. Michael from Calix mentioned, lean on the people that you trust. And so I'm almost finished, but there's been so much basketball this talk, and I'm from Minnesota, and I'm stereotypical in that I love hockey. So I have to give one shameless plug for, there was a guy named Henry Busha, and he's Ojibwe from Canada, but he grew up in Minnesota playing hockey. And he played professional hockey for 7 or 8 years. He was an Olympian, and sadly he just passed away last fall, but he had an extraordinary life, and PBS did a documentary on him recently that you can go watch online. So if you want to learn a little bit about hockey, if you're a hockey fan, go watch the Henry Busha documentary. That's awesome. Sorry, that was a long introduction, but
no, that's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. It provides context for everyone here. So, all right, Randy.
Well, welcome everyone. My name's Randy Long. I'm the IT director for the Bois Forte Tribal Government, and have been for nearly 28 years now. During this time, we've been involved in various broadband projects for the band within and outside the boundaries of the reservation. Now, how we got to this point, our experience in broadband activities were not without mistakes. We made several of them. We often rushed into projects. We didn't do our due diligence in researching contractors, and nearly agreed to contracts not favorable to the business model of the reservation, which is to own its own infrastructure to secure its future in regards to broadband. Since then, we've successfully partnered with various telecommunication providers such as CTC, and we've brought in world-class services to the band. By understanding our own limitations, we've been able to effectively and efficiently deploy a world-class network that is completely up and running now to all sectors of the reservation. I'm not saying that partnering is a perfect model for all tribes, but for those tribes that have limited resources, limited personnel, limited staffing, this probably is a good fit, and it can help you expedite this endeavor of getting broadband throughout your reservations.
Wow, very short and succinct. I like that. Joe and I, we got to work on our succinctness. So I'm curious to know, Joe, you had mentioned relationships. I'm sort of going off script here now, so don't worry about it.
All right.
You talked about the need to build relationships and understanding. How did you get the rest of the CTC group to sort of buy into our engagement? Has to happen. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something that's really quick for us to get to this decision. We're doing this project or not doing this project. How did that process go for you and for the folks at CTC?
I think there's three things. One is so CTC. Just to back up a little bit, I mentioned we're a co-op, and so we have these values and we're a mission-driven organization. We're based in Minnesota. We're about 100 employees, so we're pretty small. And when I worked for the electric co-op, we were very small. And in fact, we had some staff turning over. We're down to 12 people at one point in time trying to maintain a power network and build broadband. And we said, we don't have the workforce internally. We don't have the necessary workforce in the community right now to build a broadband network. So who can we partner with? And we ended up through a selection process working with CTC. And through that, when I was at Arrowhead, the power company, and CTC working with us as a small company, the people at CTC got to be part of building a network, and they got to experience the stories of connecting people in a way that they had never been a part of before, because it was such an unserved area. And so it brought a lot of excitement to their jobs. And so through that one first experience, it's always been, can we go find someone else to work with and do this again? Because this brings joy to my job, and I feel a sense of accomplishment, and we get to be a part of just improving communities. And so from that very first one, it's just kind of been like a wildfire that's just grown within the culture of our organization.
So can you and Randy just talk a little bit about how your two companies came together to work on getting broadband throughout the communities?
Wow.
It's been a few years.
It's been several years now. We took it upon ourselves and we wanted to design and build and roll out our own fiber to the home project throughout the reservation. But Bois Forte has limited resources. It needed to go for grant funding and seek private partners in order to get this or achieve this goal. We could not apply for state funding without a certified engineer diagram or engineering blueprint of rolling out a fiber to the home project, which certified what we wanted to do. So we worked with Cooperative Network Services out of Monongahela, Minnesota. They were an engineering firm that specialized in this. From there, we found out that CTC Communications was part owner in that. So then our next step was, hey, let's reach out to CTC Communications. Let's see what they can do for us. Perhaps they can take where we're lacking and implement this project for us. Due to some of our past mistakes, we felt this was probably the best route, the best avenue, and the fastest way we could put this network in place.
Yeah, and I think I'd just add the way that I connected with Randy was through another kind of local government organization who we both had familiarity with. It was a middle mile network, and that person had connected Randy and I. So again, it was just through trusted relationships, connecting with others that you mutually know.
So you talked about some of the permitting challenges that you've had in other projects. One of the things I hear from some of our members who are also trying to have these partnerships or engage on becoming partners, permitting on tribal lands is an issue. Did you all experience that, and how did you work through that from an engagement standpoint?
Go ahead, I'll follow up.
On the first project that we worked on, we kind of had I would say, a pretty traditional, normal permitting process. We had a year-long process working with state, TIPO, SHPO, DNR, and the permitting process there went pretty smooth. Boys Fort has a TBCP grant. That permitting process is going much different. But candidly, it's not actually the federal permitting process that's really holding us up. It's the state of Minnesota that's holding us up, and a new department that they stood up that is, we've been at permitting for 18 months, and the end is not in sight for this right now. And it's the problem is, it's not just permitting, but when you're assembling your grant application, you need to really understand how long that permitting process is going to take, because it's a compounding effect. As we look at if it's where your community is, if it's anywhere like in Minnesota, every year the cost of construction is going up 10, 15, 20%. And we don't have those types of contingencies built into our budgets. And the one plug I would give for any TBCP recipient is, if you're in a situation like this, I think we need to be talking to NTIA about, look how long this permitting process has taken. Is there supplemental funding that's going to be available so we can make sure that we can build to everyone who we said we were going to build to?
Yeah. I mean, we went as far as we've reached out to our local legislative people for advocacy to help expedite this process. We've gotten our TIPO program highly involved. Much of this build out is within a special section called the ceded territory. It's an allotment of land given to several Minnesota Chippewa tribes. And due to that, we really felt our TIPO office should have jurisdiction over that and control, and say, hey, this project is 100% good. We have no findings within this area. Let's move forward with this project. The state of Minnesota SHPO office did not see it like that. Hence, we are 18 months behind on moving this project forward.
So what are some of the, I guess, what I'll call best practices or do's and don'ts when you're trying to enter into these engagements between tribal entities and non-tribal to bring broadband connectivity to Indian country? What advice would you provide to the folks here?
There's definitely a few things I'd like to bring up, and several times throughout these meetings we've heard building that trust relationship. It's huge. Understand and build the trust relationship with the band is critical. So start by asking input on all matters of the project and advice in a respectful tone. Definitely advocate for TARO personnel throughout all aspects of the project. I can't speak on behalf of all tribes, but I certainly will for Boys Fort. Boys Fort always looks favorable upon contractors wanting to employ, educate, and train local band members. This helps build that needed trust environment and will definitely help you down the future, especially with additional contracts. Another thing is outside contractors need to understand the business model of the reservation. We need to be mindful of telecommunication carriers wanting to build up broadband networks for the reservation, only to own them in the end. Then charge residents accordingly for bringing high-speed internet to the communities. This may seem a little far-fetched, but we nearly made that mistake and engaged a telecommunication provider that was going to do that exact same thing for us. It happened to be a telecommunication provider I worked with or for in the early 90s. So I should have caught on to that, but fortunately we caught on to it before we actually signed a check for them. The last thing I'd like to say is don't assume that the tribes know the telecom business. Most don't. Meet with them, explain to them in a respectful manner to enhance that trust relationship. So.
I guess what I would, go.
Oh, I just have a question. I find it difficult. I know Randy and I talk a lot because we're both in Minnesota. But one of the things that I find difficult is the fact that I'm Sally Findy from the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota. One of the things that I've had a terrible issue with is the fact that we're a tribe. When we went after our ETC status, we went to the federal government because that's where we should be getting it from. But when we didn't get an answer from them for 2 years, they shut down our telco at Leech Lake. Not the FCC, our tribal government did. But this is a point that I'm making too, is that the state of Minnesota they're on our level. We should be asking the federal government, when we want to certify us as tribes, because most of our tribes have EPA people within our government. We are going to do our own assessment, and that should be good enough. Miigwech.
So
There you go.
just on that point, so yes, the states have the authority to designate ETCs, and if they decide not to, then the FCC has the ability. But
We would never ask the state to give us that authority because they're on our same relation, they're on the same table as us.
I understand. I understand.
That's why we never go that way. That's throwing our sovereignty out the window.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Sally. I don't feel that the state should have the authority of putting that request in place on behalf of Leech Lake. That should come from the federal government for sure.
So I have a different viewpoint because I voluntarily went to the state to give me my ATC. And in that process, actually, I got it quick. The state of New Mexico works great with us on tribes. Once I got it there, it went to the FCC and I got it. It was just kind of a rubber stamp at that time. So it really went through real fast. But it's a state to state thing. Some states are very friendly to tribes, some are not. So, but in order to build that bridge, you gotta get in there and try to do the best you can. But again, when you hit one wall, you go around it and go to find another way around it. That's all you gotta do. And that's what I did. And this process started back around 1999. So since that time till now, I've made it very easy for tribes in New Mexico to be able to go through that process if they want to. And they don't have to. It is a sovereignty issue, you're right. So, and I think it does need to go back to the states. So if states can work with them. And one thing that has been generated by NTIA is the need for BEAD to work with tribes. And that's been in there.
Right.
So it's one thing that states hopefully can garner that courage to work with tribes to be able to do that. In some places very easy, but some places very hard. So very good comment. Thank you. Any other questions, guys?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you again, Godfrey, and Randy and Joe. Thank you for participating on this panel. Hopefully this was helpful and insightful. There's a lot we can go into, but more on that at another time. So thank you very much and appreciate you all being here and being supportive.
Great. And I want to commend you guys for doing what you're doing. Not very many places can you do a partnership with a local provider to do that. But able to understand, again, communications company, I think, are the worst to try to communicate with even with each other. So, but being able to do that with a tribe, it took courage for me to go out there and try to do things. You step back, you reevaluate it, and you went back in to say, I've got to establish this communications to be able to do that. So don't stop. Everybody should not stop to be able to work with a provider if they want to work with you or not. So at some point in time, they might be able to carry you out somewhere else. So You need that participation. So thank you guys for what you guys do. Thank you, Derrick.